So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for being here. I am Ashley Sklar, the Adult Services and Community Engagement Consultant with the Connecticut State Library, Division of Library Development. I'm pleased to be bringing you more GELS today, Growing Equitable Library Services. That was co-created with my fabulous colleague, Kim Poe, our children and young adult consultant. We will be missing Kim today. She is currently keynoting with the LJ/SLJ course, How to Build and Defend Inclusive Collections. She's done fabulous work in that area, so we're very happy she's doing that. But we get to be here today for part 4 of our series with Dr. Audrey Barbikoff called Operational Changes. So as many of you know, because I think you've been joining us for this series, Audrey is the CEO of CoLab Capacity, providing community-centered consulting for libraries and social good organizations. She has more than a decade of experience in public libraries where she focused on community engagement and leadership. And you can find more about Audrey on our LibGuides. We link to her website. And she's the author of the forthcoming book, 12 Steps to a Community-Led Library, which much of this series is informed by. So just some housekeeping things before I turn it over. If you could update your name, if it's not already your name, and our library together, that would be great. We do have the live captioning feature turned on. You can adjust that for yourself at the bottom of your screen, on, off, turn it on later, turn it off later, whatever works for you. We are recording today's session, as you've probably noted, and that recording will be made available on the LibGuide. I will drop links as soon as I'm done introducing us. And the slides are actually there for you now. Those did get sent out earlier. I'll drop that link as well. I will be here with you the whole time, keeping an eye on the chat. Feel free to add your questions and comments. We like conversation. And at the end, we will be following up with you with a survey. As always, we read them. We appreciate your feedback. So please take a moment to do that. And with that, I will stop talking and I will turn it over to Audrey. Thanks, Audrey.
Thanks so much, Ashley. It's a pleasure to be here. This has been a really fun series, and I'm excited to share the final pieces with you today. So we're going to run through, it's been a little bit if you didn't come to previous ones, or, it's just you haven't been thinking about me constantly for the last couple of weeks. I can't imagine why. We'll do a little bit of a recap, so don't worry. It's really exciting to be able to wrap this up with you and to be able to reflect on the operational changes that we can make, the kind of practical, concrete steps that we can be taking, the sort of obvious surface level pieces. I know folks have been kind of chomping at the bit for some of these. And then we'll also do a little reflecting on the series as a whole. All right, so let's dive into that fundamentals recap. So what is community-led planning? It is both a mindset and a method for redistributing power to the community. And the way we've been thinking about this is through the IAP2 spectrum of public participation, which goes from inform to empower, right? From one-way communication, where the library just tells people what's going on, into the space where we ask people for input, but keep all of the power ourselves to make decisions. And then the space of community-led planning is when we give over power to the community so that it's either a true 50-50 partnership, or we've actually handed over the majority of the power to the community to decide what will we be doing, what will the outcomes of our project be, what will success look like, what are the actions that we should take. And not only do we make decisions together, but the people who will be impacted by or who will use the service or the plan or the decision that we're making, and the people who will, who will be impacted or who will use it are the people who help to make it. So the community is actively involved in co-creation, and they're not just giving input to the library. The reasons that we do this, because it does take longer, right? Often than traditional library-led planning, where we just kind of make all the decisions, right? Of course, it takes longer. It takes a lot of relationship building, right? Which is slow and complex. So why bother, right? Why do this? There are some real and compelling reasons to do things in this way. The first, and really the primary one, is that this is a method for putting our DEI values into action, our diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice values. in the library profession as a whole, right? This is a core value. You'll see it from ALA, from PLA, from IFLA, right? Like all of the big library associations are going to have a core pillar around DEI. We see it in the librarian statement of ethics. And then you likely also have it in your library in some way, right? Either an articulated value, like a list of values and something related to DEI or access is one of them, or having language just somewhere in your mission, vision, values, strategy, whatever it is that guides your library about being open to all, being accessible to all, being welcoming to all, right? These are all things that are connected to DEI values. So this is something that runs really deep through the profession and likely through your individual library as well. But how do we actually do it? Right? How do we make it happen? And community-led planning is a method for putting power in the hands of the most excluded populations that we serve. So it is an incredible force for equity in how we create our services and programs and plans. That's not the only benefit, although it's the primary one. Community-led planning makes our decisions and our services really relevant to the community, and they know it, right? Because we're out there being relevant to the community rather than telling them that we're relevant, right? We're not handing them a flyer that says, here are the 735 things that we offer. Please remember one of them the next time that you have a need. People are out there in the community in spaces they've often created for themselves, working on goals that they already care about, and the library shows up to support those things, right? So we are bringing our resources to bear on the goals the community already has for itself. So that's incredibly powerful. People see how important and how relevant library resources are, even without us kind of waving the flag about it. It builds relationships, right? You can't do community-led planning alone. You have to do it in relationship, right? It's in the name. It's definitional. Community relationships, you need them to do community-led planning, and they are an outcome of community-led planning. Right? When you do things together, you're building relationships, right? You're learning to work together. You can even think about this in your personal life, right? Like when you do something with someone, when you have a project to work on together, when you have something that you're actually creating together, it's a real relationship building opportunity. So not only are relationships an input, right? They're what you get out the other side, and those relationships then feed what you do in the future and what you do in all areas of your library service, right? You get community input on making your strategic plan, for example. Now it's time to implement that plan and bring it to life. Now you've got partners in the community who are ready to help you do that. Right? And of course, working in collaboration or partnership with outside agencies and individuals expands our resources. Right? Partners may have things that we don't. Maybe that's funding. Often that's just bodies, it's staff time. Right? And it can also be expertise. Right? They have subject expertise that we don't, and we have subject expertise that they do not, and that allows all of us to spend our time working from our strengths. So we can be amazing librarians and not sort of try to be half social workers or half business experts or right all of the other things all of the other aspirations and goals in the community that we're trying to meet. So we can play to our strengths and they can play to theirs. All right, we talked about what and why. Now, how? How do we do this? You're like, yeah, okay, this is awesome. I want to do it. How do we do it again? So knowing steps, like being able to say a community-led, planning process looks like this, A, B, C, D, step 1, step 2, step 3. It's not enough. The steps have been out there for almost 2 decades at this point. But they're not widely adopted. And it's because we need to build our library's capacity to apply them consistently to culture and systems change. Right? If community-led planning is just like one more big, slow, time-consuming, resource-consuming thing that we have to do on top of everything else, it doesn't stick, right? It just feels too onerous. So what we really need to be doing in order to embrace this work is to transform our libraries so that community-led planning becomes the lens through which we make all our decisions, right? It's not about doing more, it's about thinking differently. There are roles for leaders and there are roles for individuals in this. And so all throughout, I've been talking about, and I'll continue that today, talking about, within each step, what can managers do and what can individual contributors do? And sometimes those things are the same and sometimes they're different. So in order to get into that how do we make these transformations in our organizations? And that's what the CoLab change model is all about. This is developed through my original research. We've talked about the first two phases, inspirational and transformational, and today we're going to focus on operational. Again, like this is a 12-step process, and 9 of the steps are in those first two phases. Right? So doing that deep culture and systems work is really important, because if we jump right to the operational stuff that we're going to talk about today, a lot of times it doesn't stick. Right? It feels arbitrary to people, and it doesn't align well with it. Doesn't fit in right with the expectations and the culture that you have. So it just kind of rolls off. Right? It's people either don't understand the reason for it, and so don't adopt the meaning of it, don't use it effectively, or it's actually antithetical to how people work and they resist it. Right? So just to recap the steps that we've gone through so far. In inspirational change, prioritize and be accountable for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Educate on concepts, not procedures. Connect to core values and community goals. In transformational change, we talked about fostering a growth mindset, developing psychological safety for inclusion and innovation, making time for reflection, hiring and training for interpersonal skills and cultural humility, connecting your prior experience, and building community knowledge through relationships rather than only through data. So if you didn't come to any of the prior ones, and some of those are like, wow, Ashley's already got the link in the chat to those. So remember that you can do a deep dive, or you can revisit any of those steps. So let's take a few moments to talk to each other. I think given the number of people we have, we want 3 breakout rooms, and it looks like that should give us about 5 people per breakout room. So we're going to take some time throughout this one to talk in small groups. We're going to have about 5 people in a breakout room. I know that not all of you will be able to actively participate in a breakout room. You might be on a desk or in kind of listen only mode. That's fine. Our hope is that by putting 5 people in a room, that there will be at least 2 of you who can talk. And for those of you who are listening, I think it's still really valuable, because what you're going to hear in these breakout rooms is how people might apply some of these concepts, right? What they mean in your individual libraries. So we're really learning from each other here. So even if you can't speak, I really encourage you to be very present for these, because you're going to learn so much from your colleagues. So the topics for discussion in this breakout room, and we'll just take about 5 minutes for this one, is if you came to any of the previous webinars in the series, what's a key takeaway that you've had so far, right? What's one idea that has stuck with you, or maybe even something you've been able to start putting into practice? If you didn't come to one of those previous webinars, then you can just reflect on what you've heard briefly in this recap, and then focusing on like one idea that sort of grabbed you or that resonates with you. All right. Okay, let's go into our breakout rooms. All right, welcome back. I floated through the rooms and I heard some great discussions happening, and different discussions happening in the rooms. So I would love for any of you, if you have something, a takeaway, something that you shared or that you heard in your room that you want to share with a larger group, that resonated with you, that you thought was really interesting, please speak up and share that, or pop it in the chat if you prefer.
In our group, we were kind of talking about the fact that trying to convey this to other people is so very hard that it's almost like we need them to watch these webinars, or have someone, maybe named Aubrey, come in and talk to our staff and actually help us present this. Because even though I've printed out all the slides, etc., it's no way I can present this in a cohesive way to people that are just not understanding when I talk to them.
It's hard, right? This work is a mindset shift. It's not just a concept that we can learn on a purely intellectual level, right? It's about, it takes time. It's hard to kind of shift our whole mental model of how we approach service in many cases. So you're absolutely right that that's a challenge. That's part of why I'm so excited that I got the chance to go through this whole series with all of you, right, and really do a deep dive, because I can see, even just from casual conversations and listening in for a minute or two, that you all in this room really get it. It's exciting and wonderful. What else? Anything else that came up in your conversations that you'd like to share? Well, I'll share a practical tip that I heard in one of them, and apologies, I didn't catch who, I did not write down who said this. But if you want to speak up and claim ownership of your great idea, please do. But someone saying, we go to community events, right? And we have a table there and we put out flyers, but, we're expressing outward, but are we listening to people there? Are we going around to other people's tables? Are we using that opportunity to build relationships with the other organizations that are there? So I thought that was just like a really nice little practical way that people, one way that you can put some of this into action. All right. Feel free throughout to continue just putting reflections or ideas in the chat if you would like to, and we'll have more opportunities to talk with each other as well. So now we're moving ahead into talking about the operational, how things are done day to day in your organization and how you can shift those to support some of this work. And even just hopping through those breakout rooms earlier, I already heard people saying things like, there's a great opportunity to build a relationship, or there's something that's happening, but it's after hours, or, it's at a time I can't get away. Like, I'm in a small library. I don't have other staff, right, to cover the desk. Like, talking about some of the operational challenges that can come up in trying to do this work. So that's exactly what we're going to be talking about now. So the steps in the operational change phase are to provide time, autonomy, and flexibility for relationship building, empower everyone in the organization, and measure what matters. So, phew, some people have been asking for this all throughout. Now it's finally time to look at the concrete processes and procedures. I said this in the beginning, but I'm just going to harp on it one more time, and then I'll close my mouth about it. But don't jump straight here. Right? You need these changes to be meaningful in the context of your organizational culture and systems. So if you just do these things without doing any of the other stuff, chances are it won't have the impact that you're looking for. Okay. Providing time, autonomy, and flexibility for relationship building. So as we all know, relationship building doesn't always happen on the library schedule, right? We can give people, first of all, people need time, right? It takes time to go out and build relationships, and it especially takes time to do this when there's not an immediate deliverable that's expected, right? When you're not saying, I'm going out to, I'm going to meet with this community partner because we're going to talk about this program that we're thinking about doing, right? That's hard enough. It's even a harder sell, right? To say, well, I'm going to take time to go out in the community just to get to know the community. I'm going to, meet with this community leader and then take them out to coffee for half an hour or an hour just to hear about their goals and aspirations. And I don't know if anything is going to come of this. And if it does, I don't know what that thing will be, right? I don't know if it's going to be a program. I don't know if it's going to influence a policy, like, and if we need to come to people with that open mind in order to build the relationships for the cool ideas to come out, right? During my research, I talked to one librarian who was like, 25% of the conversations I have actually turn into a thing, right? 25% into something on the calendar. Which doesn't mean those other relationships are not valuable, right? They're extremely valuable, and they might turn into something later, or they might inform the direction you go. But it means we have to give people time to build relationships just for the sake of building relationships, right? Without any immediate expectation that something's going to happen. And when we have a lot of competing priorities, and we have desk schedules, and we have open hours, right? And we're trying to keep the lights on and the doors open and enough bodies in the building, and that's not easy. And it's not just about giving people enough time, right? We can't just say, well, okay, you have 3 hours a week to build relationships, and that is Tuesdays from 9 to noon, right? Because as we know, we need to be there when community wants us to be there, and that's often not going to be at the times that are convenient for us, right? So it's not just enough time, it's having flexibility with time. Then once people are there, right? Okay, so I've got enough time to do something, and I've got the flexibility to be where I need to be when I need to be there. Then staff also need the autonomy to make some decisions, right? So they need to be able to make decisions about where they're going to invest that time, who they're going to build relationships with, right? And then once they're in that space, they need the autonomy to be able to make commitments on behalf of the library and to speak on behalf of the library. Often that kind of responsibility is kind of limited to people in certain positions, right? That sort of like only a director or a leader or maybe a librarian, right, is empowered to do this, or even a librarian is maybe, within a very narrow frame, right? But you hired these folks, right? If you're the manager or the leader, or or they're working for you, even if you aren't the ones who hired them, you have to trust them, right? We trust them to represent the library when they're standing at the desk. We trust them to represent the library when they're talking to patrons. We need to be able to trust people to represent the library and make good decisions on behalf of the library when they're in community. And that can be a tough change, right? If you're in an organization that has traditionally had a lot of very strict control. So I want to encourage opening that up a little bit. And often people will really flower when they're given enough autonomy to match their responsibility. I know that it's not easy to make this time, right? The autonomy piece is more of a mindset shift, more of kind of a policy shift, but just like the practical need of finding the time and the flexibility of that time, that's hard. So recognizing that needs to be balanced, right? That you do what you can do and you start with what you can support. So that probably means, especially if you're a small library, limited staff, you can't follow up on every opportunity, right? Or you can't, you can't reach out to everyone that you would want to. So I would encourage you to kind of at least develop a little bit of a schedule around that. Like once a month, I'm going to try to set aside some time to do this, right? Or I'm going to think about who are the people I really need to connect with most, and I'm going to prioritize them. So, even if you can only do a small fraction of how much you want to do, just being really clear about setting aside time, making some policies that help people set aside time can make a big difference. So one of the ways you can do this, one of the strategies is outside of service point staffing, let people flex their work hours and their location. Right. I'm sure that we all have kind of operational needs of like, you just need your people on the desk, or you just need them at a program or manning a service point at some personing a service point, humaning a service point, covering a service point. So at some point, right? Like we just have times that we need people in the building, and that's totally fine. That's understandable. And different libraries have really different expectations around this. I worked in a large system that said people in librarian positions spend 75% of their time off the desk, right? And there's a paraprofessional position that's designed pretty much to be on the desk 75% of their time, right? That's kind of a large system thing in my experience. Small libraries is like everyone's doing it all, right? We're all trying to cover. So what this looks like can be really different. But especially as we're kind of coming back in our post-COVID world and like going, we've gone from all in person pretty much in most cases to all virtual, and now we're finding our way back again with a little bit of each. Keeping in mind that allowing people outside of their service point commitments, allowing people some time to be flexible in when they work and to be flexible about where they work can be huge in building relationships. So you can get rid of a lot of red tape if possible, right? If people have to go through a really onerous process to like be able to work off site right now, or if there's a long approval process to be able to like take 2 hours, come in 2 hours late on Monday morning and stay 2 hours late on Tuesday evening, right, for a community meeting. Try to get as much red tape as possible out of the way there. And this goes back to kind of trusting your people, right? As much as possible, you want to develop kind of trust-based systems here, and not use policy as a club that's a substitute for trust, right? Not having super strict policies because there's one person who might abuse them, right? Matching responsibility with authority. So one of the key reasons that you see failures of accountability is when there's a mismatch between responsibility and authority. Basically, when we say like, you're responsible for this program, for example, and its outcomes, but then we don't give people enough autonomy to make the decisions that they need to make that thing successful, it kind of falls apart, right? And it breeds a lot of resentment. So it's really helpful kind of to think when you're trying to decide how much autonomy people need or how much freedom to give people, especially, if you're in that managerial role. Think about what is someone responsible for and how much decision-making power do they really need in order to be able to do that thing successfully, right? And you want those to match. So if you're a manager, what you can do is make explicit procedures or practices here, right? You want to flex your time, right? Flexing time is encouraged in order to build relationships. Here's how you do it, right? Here's what approval is needed or isn't, right? Here's how you should communicate about it. Making clear what people can and can't do or say in relationship to the library. Sometimes people just need to hear that something's allowed, even if it already is, right? I've had people, especially people in paraprofessional positions, say like, well, I didn't speak up with my idea because I didn't think I was supposed to, right? I didn't know I was allowed to do that. So just saying to people, even if you already have a culture where people are encouraged to go to a community meeting and represent the library, right? Like letting them know you can speak up. You can be actively involved here. You can make some basic commitments on behalf of the library. So make these procedures explicit so people know what they are and how to use them and encourage their use. If you're an individual and you're not in control, like these are very sort of policy practice-based things. They're things that are in the control, right, of managers. But if you're an individual, ask for what you need. Sometimes the fact that these policies aren't there or aren't working the way you need them to is kind of an accident. Basically, it's just that no one has thought about what you need. So there might be a barrier in place that someone would be pretty happy to move out of your way. Right. Or that's just, it's the way we've always done it. We've always had this really long, complicated process for if you want to flex your schedule. Maybe that's not the right thing anymore. So sometimes just, advocating for what you need and why to your management can make a big difference. A lot of times, right, they're not trying to get in your way. They're trying to help. So ask for what you need and explain why. So we're going to go back into our breakout rooms. And we'll discuss what are some of the important things in your community that are taking place outside of your normal working hours now, and to what extent are you or your team able to accommodate those things. Also, you can talk about what are the processes or procedures at your library that support you in using your time to build relationships. So what are the processes at your library that get in the way of doing this, and what are the things that help? What could you do to improve? Finally, when you're representing the library to a community group or leader, how much autonomy do you have, right? To what extent are you able to speak on behalf of the library or commit resources on behalf of the library? And if you need more autonomy, how might you advocate for it? I get the sense that many of the folks in this room are directors or upper leaders in your organization. Ashley, I see you like kind of nodding, so I think that's mostly-ish. So I'll tweak this question a little bit for you. Because you probably feel your job is to represent the library, so you probably feel very able to do that. But maybe think of this from the perspective of some of your staff members, right? So if you send a librarian out to a community group or to have a conversation with a community leader, how much autonomy do they have, right? How free do they feel to speak on behalf of the library and represent? All right, so that's a lot. So let's take 8 minutes for this one. Let's make it 9 and come back at 45. Nice round number. All right, welcome back. Again, I heard some really great discussion, some helpful practical tips being shared. So I would love for you to share some of your favorite tips out with the whole group. So what's something that you talked about in your breakout room that helps you make more time or be flexible with your time or have your practice and your policies match your needs? And feel free to speak up, or you can pop things into the chat as well. All right, well, I'll share a couple of great tips that I heard. Someone mentioned, and again, I won't put anyone on the spot, but if this was you and you want to add to, say more about your great idea, please share. Kim's here. Hello, Kim. Hooray. One of the ideas I heard was sort of deputizing volunteers as library ambassadors, finding the people who are already your big advocates in the community, people who already are, talk up library services and love the library, and bringing them on formally as volunteers to help expand your capacity to be out in the community and to represent the library. Another interesting idea that I heard was partnering with other libraries in the area to expand your capacity. So then even if you can't be there, right, maybe someone between 2 or 3 systems, right, maybe someone can be there and sort of represent all of you. And someone said that that's when you do that, it's half the work and twice the fun. So I love that. I might keep that one. I think that's great. Anyone want to speak to any of those or share any others? All right, I'm seeing one in the chat. We talked a little about staffing. Could there be the option to offer flex time for doing outreach outside of normal working hours? Yeah, that's a great one. It's a really concrete policy, right? A concrete practice that you can put in place to make that easier. I'm seeing some thumbs up for that in the chat as well. I'll also share one tip that maybe someone shared in their breakout rooms when I was in one of the other rooms, but that I did not hear come up specifically. And that one is do less. And that is like the hardest one for libraries. Like we do so much and we just add and add and add and add, right? Because it's all great. There is no end to the number of fantastic things that a library could do, right? And so deciding which ones we will do, that this library will do, is really hard, right? And that's where something like a strategic plan or some goals can kind of help you winnow. But there is just this pressure to like do more and more and to never stop doing anything because there's always one person who really loves the thing, right? And really loves it the way it is now and really advocates hard for it. But I just want to encourage you to give yourself permission to do less. Stop things that are kind of stale or, you know, that have really kind of dwindled to like the same 3 patrons over and over. Even if things are okay or even good, there's an opportunity cost, right? Are they taking up capacity that's stopping you from doing something better or that's more aligned with what you need to be doing right now? So these things take time. So do fewer programs, right? Because a community-led program takes longer, right? Dial back the things you can do back, that you can dial back. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of like, this is the best advice, love it, do less. Great time to reflect and make some hard decisions. Yeah, like help people on staff identify, like have a brainstorming session in the staff meeting that's like our no list. What can we stop doing? Right? What can we say no to? What can we do less of? It's okay not to do it. Yeah, 100%. All right, next step is to empower everyone in the organization. Community-led work doesn't thrive in a silo, right? And one of the questions that I get from people is like, is there a specific, like, should we have a position that, you know, like a community engagement position, right? Or like a community outreach librarian. And when I talked to librarians who were in all kinds of different libraries with all sorts of different staffing structures. I had some people who were in a job or in a department that was dedicated to community outreach. And I talked to people who didn't have anything like that. And it was just kind of like, you know, everyone's just sort of part of everyone's responsibility. And neither of those things was inherently better than the other. There was not one structure that really emerged as the best, because what was important was open communication. So, you know, having someone who is dedicated to community-led or community-led work or community-centered work, that's great in terms of, it means you're putting time and resources in. But if that person is siloed, right? If they're the only one, if they're the only one who does the work, and they're the only ones who are empowered to understand what this work is, it's not really helpful for the whole organization because it's too much for that one person. They're going to burn out, they're going to leave, and then you're still not going to have anybody who knows how to do this, right? Or is motivated to do this. And on the other hand, right, if you don't have someone who's dedicated, you know, has a dedicated position, sometimes people have trouble finding time and getting the training. So it's like there's pros and cons to each way. What matters is that people are not siloed and that there's open communication and shared knowledge in the organization. And I'm seeing Kim chiming in the chat. DLD has a continuing education consultant, and yet here Ashley and I are doing continuing education. It's everyone's work. Yeah, absolutely. It's everyone's work. It's a perfect way to put it. So what does that look like? Because people in the organization do have different jobs and do have different sets of responsibilities. So it can't just be like everyone does everything the same necessarily. Maybe you're in a small enough library that everyone just does everything. That's fine. I love libraries like that, but that's where I've always liked working personally. But what you can do for everyone is that everyone should understand what community-led work is and why it's happening, right? Someone at the very beginning was like, I get it now. Like, I'm into this. This is awesome. I don't know how to talk about this with my staff, right? I don't know how to talk about this with other people in my library. It's really easy for that to happen. So you want to be creating a culture where it's okay for everyone to take time to learn about this, right? Where everyone gets continuing education, where everyone gets training on the concepts that underpin community-led work, right? So that doesn't necessarily have to mean a community-led planning training. I could, but it could also, giving everyone access to training about DEI, giving everyone access to training about asset-based perspectives, probably basically anything in the GELS catalog, right? Is like, you're helping people develop the mental model and the framework to understand this kind of work. And then, you can let people in your organization know, like, here's what we're doing and here's why. Not just passive, but everyone can be invited to contribute their unique perspectives and ideas and their connections based on their own lived experiences. Right? This is especially really important because we know that the profession of librarianship has a big problem when it comes to including the voices of BIPOC librarians, LGBTQ librarians, gender nonconforming librarian, like, from anyone really with any kind of marginalized identity is not well included in professional level librarian positions. So what that means is there's a pretty good chance that the way that your library staffing looks is a very heavily kind of white, female, cisgender, able-bodied, middle class, blah, 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 right? Professional level staff, your librarians and your managers, and a much more diverse and much more representative of your community body of staff, right, in paraprofessional positions that often don't get to do this stuff, that are often not asked for their input, not empowered to, start off programming, right, or be involved in programming, not empowered to be involved in big decisions about, strategic plans or facilities plans, and people whose voices kind of don't get included. So it's really important that everyone in the organization is actively invited, not just like a passive, hey, you can, my door is always open, but that everyone is actively invited to contribute their perspectives and their ideas and to think about, to bring their whole selves. Like, people have their own personal networks, right? They have their communities that they're involved in, that they have, someone just put in the chat, yeah, window, mirror, and sliding door staffing. I love that. We always talk about that in relationship to like children's books primarily, right? But thinking about that in our staff as well. Yes, our staff as a whole give us windows and mirrors and sliding doors into our community. So like, we really want to be able to embrace, what everyone on our staff brings, whatever their position is, whether they're full-time or part-time, whether they have an MLS or not, like kind of whatever those hierarchical power structure things are in our organizations, making sure that everyone feels welcome to do this, to say, I see this in the community, and I think that the library could play a role in it. So yeah, let's move into strategies. So as I've said, there's not really one inherently better staff structure, but you can think about your structure. So think about what in your organization is going to facilitate open communication the best, right? What's going to facilitate open communication, shared learning, what's going to help you invest time and resources. The way that structure looks is going to be kind of unique to your community, right? It depends on your staffing levels and your budget, and just kind of your norms, right? So just because there isn't one staffing model that's clearly the best doesn't mean that thinking about the staffing model isn't helpful, right? You do want to think about what's going to work best at your library to encourage the kind of open sharing and open knowledge, right? Open learning that we just discussed. When you have trainings that are relevant to community-led work, make those open to all staff and make it not just open, but like help them come, right? It's one thing to say, oh, it's open to all staff. But if you have a circulation clerk who only works 2 days a week and spends 98% of their time right, on a service point, how are they really going to attend, right? So, giving people flex time, work release time, right? Making it possible for people to continue to engage in professional development, regardless of their position. Because again, people just need this context, right? It really helps the person, even if they're not the ones doing it, the people who are doing it are really helped when everyone in the organization gets it, right? When there's a shared culture, when they're not isolated and siloed. So make these available to everyone. And they don't just have to be outside trainings. One of the most important things you can do is have staff share with each other, right? So when you have some staff who are engaged in community-led work, whether that's their sole job or whether that's you or someone else in your organization is kind of a champion of this and is doing something really cool, share that with everyone, right? Present it at a staff meeting, send periodic email updates, put it on your intranet, kind of like whatever are the communication channels that are effective in your organization. Let everyone see the work that's happening and understand why that work is happening, right? It's amazing how often like something's going on over here and like the people over here don't even really know about it, right? Because they get the message that, oh, that's not relevant to your job, right? Your circulation clerk, you don't need to know what's going on with programming. You don't have time for that, right? So breaking that down, making sure that everyone understands, that everyone hears what's going on, that everyone can support it, and everyone feels welcome to give input, right? To give ideas, to bring connections. So just like a little bit of a side note on that, there is a difference between giving people an opportunity to contribute and exploiting people. Right. And this is especially true for our BIPOC staff and for women and people who are gender nonconforming, basically people who like tend to get the extra emotional labor and visible labor dumped on them in organizations. So not everyone in your organization is compensated at the same rate. So just because someone brings a lot of really rich connections in the community that other staff don't have, perhaps because they're a person of color, that is not a reason to then like basically expect more work from that person for no more money. Right. So really important that we are giving people ways to meaningfully contribute that are within the bounds, right, of what they're asked to do in their job, and more importantly, like what they're compensated for. If you're going to be consistently asking someone to do more or different work than they're doing now, revisit their compensation. Right? It's really important that we are paying people fairly for the rich expertise that they bring, so we're not taking advantage of people. All right, so we're going to go back into breakout rooms and we will take 5 minutes for this one. And the questions to discuss are who in your organization is really encouraged to speak up with ideas and build community relationships, and not just, on paper, who is encouraged, but in reality, who is encouraged, right? And that could be based on job role, on part-time, full-time staff, on identity, right? Like who feels safe to speak up and who doesn't? And why is that? And then think about your organization's structure. So how does the structure support or impede community-led work at your library? In what ways is your structure effective or ineffective? And how might you revisit it to help make it more effective? Sound good? All right, let's take 5 minutes on this one. I see that, Kathy. All right, welcome back. Thank you, thank you. So let's share. What are some things that you discussed in your group? That some strategies or some reflections on your structure. What are some things you discussed in your group that you want to share? I know you're having great discussions because I'm listening to them. So I know you have great things to share with each other. All right, I will share some of the things that I heard that I really love. And then again, I'm bouncing between rooms, so I'm sure there are many great things that I hear that I don't hear, right? That you're sharing. So please contribute those. I heard some people. One of the things I said is that that I heard someone say is like it's a structural issue when we have planning meetings that only include staff. So of course things get planned by staff because they're the only ones in the room. That's like such a practical, right? Who's in your meetings? I heard people talk about structural issues, not just in the library, but in the community, like transit. Right? That it's hard for people to get to the library in some cases. So you need to go out if you're going to engage people. I also heard people reflect on sort of the different dispositions of staff, right? Staff who've been doing it a long time and they like want to stay at their desk, right? They want to be where they are. And then on the other hand, that the people who are really doing it right a lot of the time are the children's librarians, right? And your youth staff, yeah. It's like, woo. That the children's staff really have such a rich history of and for a long time have really been leading the vanguard on this, right? Of being out in the community, of trying to center youth voice, right? working and collaborating with youth themselves and with youth serving organizations. So that's a great tip that for those of you who are, on the adult side of things or who are in administration, like looking to the folks in youth services who often really like have a lot of this down and allowing them to be a model for the organization. In terms of people who kind of want to stay put, I'd say like, first of all, you're going to have those folks, right? And as I heard someone say, like, you need someone to be on the desk, right? So to some extent, that's fine. My hope is that a lot of times, like if you have a lot of folks who are expressing that resistance, a lot of times it means it's time to go back to some of the previous phases, right? Because those are folks who are not feeling supported in doing this kind of work or aren't seeing the value, don't understand why you would do this kind of work, and don't see how it matters to the library or the community. So a lot of times like that lack of motivation actually has a cause that you can address. Not always, right? Sometimes it's just like, look, when I took this job, it was about standing behind a desk and that's what I want to do and that's what I'm going to do. As the culture of your library shifts, you might see some of those folks start to move on and different types of people with just a different orientation come into your organization, and that's okay. Right? That's okay. Another like just concrete thing I heard was when someone comes forward with an idea, instead of the library director or upper administration saying like, okay, yes, great idea, now I'm going to go do it, right? And then that person is overloaded all the time, saying like, that's a great idea, you go with it. What resources can I put at your disposal to help with that, right? Who can I get in the room to help you with that? So, that go with that, letting people be in charge of their own ideas, right? Making them happen. And thinking of the library itself as a community, right? That, and I really love that point because it made me want to emphasize like so much of even though what we're talking about is external, often really what you want to do internally is mirroring what we're trying to do externally, right? Is creating a library that is led by, centered by, right? Where the voices of everyone, where everyone's voices count, where everyone can participate, where everyone has a role in shaping what happens, right? That we infuse this perspective into our culture, and that affects what we do externally, and it affects how we work internally. Seeing in the chat, it might be worth looking at the hours of operation. Yeah, to see if opening later or closing earlier might give time needed to attend community functions without sacrificing desk coverage. Yeah, that's huge, right? That's a big one. And that's like, I love that because that's a sacred cow. This is like, the idea of changing open hours can be rough, but I know I've certainly worked in libraries where that last hour is just dead, right? There's just no one coming in from 6 to 7. It sounds like a great idea that people can stop by after work, but like it is just not happening. Right? Or maybe a book locker, for example, where people could still pick up their holds at any time would kind of fill the need for some of that, some of those times when you're open, but you're not offering programming and not that many people are coming in. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else that people want to share? Ideas that came up? All right, we are on to the last step. And I heard people talking about this in our very first breakout room. So I was like, all right, we're on track. And this is to measure what matters, right? We have so many standard kind of output measures that we use in libraries, right? And how many people, what's our door count? What's our cert count? How many people came to the program, right? Attendance. And that's reinforced because often the state, sorry guys, asks for that information. And it's helpful, right, to have those kinds of benchmarks. So there's a reason to ask for that, but it's pervasive throughout all of library culture, right? It's in our individual organizations, it's in our associations. It's the kind of information we need to report out. But often it's not really, and then states are doing it because IMLS is asking you, right? Okay, good, we'll blame IMLS. I mean, there's nothing wrong with collecting this information. This is important information. And when we're talking about the success of a community-led initiative, we want to make sure we're measuring what actually matters to that work and to the community. So what are the things that matter? How well we're building our relationship, the strength of our relationship, the processes, the products, right? That, that, we want to know was this program successful in building a relationship and strengthening a relationship, especially with communities that we haven't served well in the past, right? That's huge. That's what we want. That the relationship helps us make the thing, right, the deliverable, and the deliverable helps us make the relationship. And then when I talked to people in my research, it was like if they felt like their work was successful, it was because of the success of the relationship. Like they were not really all that interested in how many people showed up, at least who showed up the first time, right? A lot of times it was like we did it the first time, we had a couple people and but like we kept working together, we kept evolving, and eventually we found something that was, you know, really great and really appealed to a lot of folks. So that focus on relationships, that they really cared about being successful in their relationships, and those sort of standard outputs were very secondary. The other thing that matters is our impact on community goals. So again, those output measures tend to really focus on us, right? Usage of library things, hits on the website, uses of the database, right? What we would love to be doing in these community-led programs and events and services is we're doing things because the community has told us what's important to them, right? And we're helping them achieve it. So we want to be articulating our impact in terms of those community goals. So it's like not, you know, okay, well, we had this partnership and X number of people use the library programs, but hey, our community really cares about food insecurity, right? This is a big issue in our community right now. And therefore the library, you know, partnered or became part of this coalition that addresses food insecurity. And we ended up creating this program together, right? And here's how, so instead of saying, you know, X number of people came to our program, we're able to say we made a direct impact on food insecurity in our community, right? So tying our work up to community goals as much as possible. Let's talk about some strategies for that. And a huge one here is outcome-based planning and evaluation, which is like its own whole webinar that Ashley and Kim probably already have somewhere, but we're just going to briefly have an introduction. And basically what this means is starting with the end in mind. So evaluation isn't something you do at the end, it's something you do at the beginning and then continue through the end. It's kind of a backwards planning model. So essentially what you want to do when you're working with community is begin by defining together what success looks like and how it will be measured. We don't want to make assumptions here, right? Because a lot of times what we think is important is very rooted in our, you know, the professional culture of libraries, in kind of our own worldviews, right? In our own cultures, in our own biases. It's really easy to make assumptions that everyone thinks success looks the same, and it is not true. So you really want to take that time up front to say, what are we trying to accomplish here? Like, let's develop this shared vision of what a super successful, outcome looks like, right? And be really clear about that. And then you want to work backwards and say, okay, how do we get there? Well, how do we get to that? Well, how do we get to that? Right? What do we do in order to get there? And I'll show you an example of this in just a sec. But that can be called a theory of change or a logic model, where you start with what's the big thing that we want to accomplish together? How are we going to know if we're getting there? Like, what's something we can measure that will help us understand? And then using that to help define our actions, rather than kind of the standard forward, I guess, planning of deciding what we're going to do and then thinking afterwards about how we're going to evaluate it. It's also helpful as you're measuring what matters. So you've decided now what you're going to measure. It might be different for every program or community-led initiative, right? You might have some things that kind of end up being somewhat standard, but you know, you're working with a different community on a different kind of project at a different moment in time. They might care about different things. So that makes it a little harder. You know, we can just have a spreadsheet now that's like, well, how many people came to your program? Program 1, program 2, program 3, right? It's pretty easy. And we likely have systems in place to store and process this data. So something that can be really important for organizational learning is thinking about how are you going to collect this data, right? Maybe the standard kind of post-program survey isn't going to do it. Maybe we need something else, or maybe we need something in addition. Maybe we need to ask different questions, even if we do it. How are we going to keep that information? Where is it going to go so that we can see it and compare it and learn from it? And then what are we going to do with it, right? Who needs to hear about this, right? How are we going to actually use the data we collect to get buy-in from leadership, or to let the community know the impact of what we're doing, right? Or to feed back to partners? So think about what data you need and then what your goal is in using it. and that can help you develop systems to share it. There is not really, that I have found, an existing system that is like that sort of off the shelf that is perfect for doing this. So it does mean kind of a homegrown solution in a lot of cases. So I'm going to take just a second and talk about theory of change. Kim dropped a book recommendation in the chat of 5 Steps of Outcome-Based Planning and Evaluation. I love that book.
It does exactly what you're talking about, asking for a very simple outcomes goal. There's also a youth version of the same book. Both of them are at the service center, so you don't even have to buy them. You can check them out. And I swear to you, they're like 60 pages and the books are like this big. We're not talking about like an academic text here. So just wanted to share that bit of knowledge.
That's huge. Those are, I didn't even know there was a youth one, but the original one, my absolute favorite. And yeah, it's like 100 pages, maybe, small pages. It's a pretty easy read and it's super helpful. So here's the 30-second version of what you can get in that book, which is you start with your impact. So what's the big picture difference you want to make in the community, right? What's the this is your food insecurity, this is your housing insecurity, this is your combating opportunity gaps in the summer slide. These are like the big ideas that you want to be able to say, like, the library is making a difference, and you probably have no idea how to measure these things, and that's okay. Right? We're going to start by just saying, like, what's the dream, right? What's the change we want to make in a community? So one of the reasons this is sometimes called a logic model is we're going to make a series of small logical leaps that help us understand how the library may be getting there, right? So we can't know for sure, we can't measure this big idea necessarily, but we can create a pretty reasonable chain of logic that says that we're probably making the impact that we want. So what's this big picture impact? Then we're going to make that a little bit easier to measure. We're going to say, okay, what's a short-term change in an individual that would logically lead to this big impact? The subject of this sentence of an outcome is not the library. It is the person, the community member who is participating in your thing, right, in your project. So can I give you an example? Yeah, okay. I won't give an example on the fly. We'll run through it next. Then we're going to say, okay, so we know that we want to achieve this big picture thing. So probably the short-term change means we're getting there. Now, what's something we can observe or measure that would help us understand how well we're achieving that outcome? It's not perfect. We're not going to find a metric that covers, right, a measurable thing. And this is where I hear a lot of resistance from libraries often around data, is that it's like, well, that doesn't tell the whole story, right? Like, so much of what we do is so qualitative that, like, there's no, and there's certainly, I'm a qualitative researcher. There are certainly ways to measure this kind of stuff, but like failing, outside of like bringing a PhD student into your library to help you with this stuff, like, a lot of times, right, there are things that aren't easily measurable. So I get that. We're not telling the whole story with these numbers, but we can find some numbers that help us tell a pretty good version of the story, right? That give us kind of an indication that we're heading in the right direction and let us sort of see magnitude, right? Are we doing a lot of this? Are we doing a little of this? Did we get a lot better? Did we get a little better, right? Just giving us something kind of concrete to work from. Then we're going to say, okay, here are the numbers we want to reach. What are the things we actually have to do to get there? Right? What are the changes? What are the actions we have to take? What do we have to do in this program? Or what needs to go into this process? Or what needs to happen in this space? And then what resources do those actions to succeed? So now we're going to do that. Impact. Teens are engaged members of the community ready to succeed in college and career. Right? Big picture goal. We're like, yes, that's something we want to do as a library. I don't know how to measure that. Right? Okay, our outcome then is that teens take on a leadership role in community programs. They develop skills like project management, budgeting, public speaking. So you can see the logic here, right? If teens take a leadership role in a project that benefits the community and they develop skills that we know are pretty connected, right, to success in college and career, okay, you can logically say that if teens, right, take the lead on a community program, that this probably helps them, right, succeed in college and career. So what are the things that we can measure that help us see how we're doing? Well, we could measure the number of programs that are planned and led by teens. We can ask teens who participate if they feel more confident or knowledgeable, right, related to college and career, and see how many say yes, right? We can ask teens if they've put a library opportunity on their first resume, right, and try to look for that. So there are some things that we can measure. What actions can we take to help us get there? Well, maybe we can support a TAB, a teen advisory board, right? And then have that group plan a Teen Voices Summit, right? Or plan a certain number of programs per year where the teens are in charge. Now we're creating structural opportunities to put teens, right, in charge of programs. And some of the inputs that we need to make that happen, well, we need a teen librarian, right? We need a program budget, and we need a bunch of snacks, right? So now what you can do is read that backwards from the bottom up. We have a full-time teen librarian and a teen programming budget and snacks, so that we can support a TAB that's responsible for planning a Teen Voices Summit, so that will increase the number of programs planned and led by teens, so that teens take on a leadership role in community programming and develop important skills, so that teens are engaged members of the community ready to engage in college and career. So you've now created a theory of change, a theory of how the small thing that you do, right? You have your TAB do this, right? You find a donor who can get you a lot of pizza, like how this small, maybe even seemingly unimportant thing you do, how it feeds up directly to this big important impact. So now you can communicate the value of what you do by going bottom up, and you can decide what you need to do by going top down. So a 40-second version of something that is, again, like a 90-minute webinar, but I think really, it's helpful just to have kind of a grounding in that. So we just have a few minutes left. So I am going to skip over having the breakout rooms discuss this, but let's just have a discussion as the whole group. What does a successful community relationship look like to you? How do you know when you've been successful? How do you measure success now? How might you use something like a theory of change or a logic model to help you measure what matters? I'll ask you again, you can just speak up or you can pop something in the chat. You're all so chatty in your small group.
I have an answer.
Okay, great.
So we've got a community too. Our community just happens to be a whole state that's very densely packed full of humans. But I'd like to say that one of the ways that we evaluate whether or not we are successfully starting or strengthening a community relationship is when our community begins to come to us and to ask for certain things from us. I think that shows a level of trust that people know that they can come to you and they can ask for something that they need assistance in. And this is from this is just me speaking, perspective of someone who works for DLD. And I can imagine being at a library in a town that, when people begin to come off the street and come to you, it's because they're trusting you as someone who can be a provider of resources, like in a non-judgmental and supportive way. So that's one of my answers. Yay, me and Kathy have the same brain.
Yep, seeing in the chat, someone saying I was thinking the same thing. Yeah, that's fantastic. And going back to the model, I love that because it does live in that middle section. Like that's something measurable, right? You can or observable. You can say how often is this happening? How many agencies are doing this? Who's not doing this, right? Who have we made connections with who then didn't reach out to us about, the next big thing that they did? Yeah, absolutely. Well, with that, we have made our way through all of the 3 steps in this phase and all 12 of the steps in the process. So just a reminder here of what the 3 things are that we've talked about today: providing time, autonomy, and flexibility for relationship building, empowering everyone at the organization, and measuring what matters. Reflecting back on what you've accomplished through this whole series, you learned about the fundamentals of community-led planning. You assessed your organization's current capacity to conduct community-led planning. You learned about 12 steps that you can take to increase your organization's capacity. And you talked about all of it with your peers, learning how to apply these concepts in practice. And you built relationships with each other, with other people who are doing the same. So I hope that you'll continue those relationships after this series and continue to reach out to each other, share contact information. You probably know each other already, but continue talking about these things together and supporting each other. So to reflect together as a group, and again, speak up or in the chat, thinking about either today or any of the webinars in this series, what's one idea that's felt particularly important or meaningful to you? What's still challenging to you? What's a question or idea that you're still grappling with or you want to learn more about? How might you keep in touch with someone else who you jived with during this series? And you can pop things in the chat if you would prefer not to speak up. While you're thinking about that, I'm just going to flash up my contact information. Feel free to reach out anytime. I offer a free monthly newsletter as well with information about trainings like this and community engagement, cool resources in general. You might recognize someone who's going to show up in the next newsletter. Her name might be Kim, just saying. So feel free to reach out if there's anything that I can do to support you. And don't forget to take the survey. Kim's put in the chat the link to the evaluation. So please take that. And just in our last minute, feel free if you have any reflections to share on your way out. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Audrey. Thank you everyone for joining us. And even Kim, thank you for joining us halfway through. Yay.
Yeah.
All right. Some nice things rolling in the chat. Well, with that, I will say thanks to everyone. You can find all the information on our LibGuides for Audrey and her slides and recordings. So share them, rewatch them, and we'll see you soon.